without life, there can be no death. Without death, there can be no life. It's like they're two sides of the same coin. And no matter how thinly you slice a coin, there are always two sides. Death, death, death. This is going to be a follow-up episode, a part 2, kind of the last episode, 352, where I talked about that speech from the Lord of the Rings, from King Theoden, in which they're charging into battle and they're just showing this bravery, this courage. So definitely go watch that episode if you haven't already, or listen to it, rather. But I want to hone in on that one last little part there of that speech, this idea of death, because death holds a very special meaning for us as humans. In fact, you could argue that it holds the meaning for human beings. Of course, the Stoics were pretty clear on this, that death was indifferent. It wasn't good, it wasn't bad. It was just natural. It was just something that happened to us. They also have the idea of memento mori, the practice of memento mori, in which, yes, we meditate on our death. We think about it. We think about our mortality and the mortality of those that we love and care about. And they did accept that death was something that we naturally fear. They were very accepting and clear about that. Like, listen, you're probably going to be a little anxious. You're probably going to be a little nervous. You're probably going to fear death. It's normal. It's a very normal thing. However, they thought that when you look at things objectively, naturally, death shouldn't really be considered as a good or evil. It's just something that happens to us. It's a part of life. And so it seems very interesting that as an army is charging into battle, that they would scream death. And so what does this actually mean? Well, in some sense, it's an act of courage, right? It's that courage that we talked about, that we are not going to let our death stop us from doing the right thing. And I'm going to refer to D-Day as well, because I talked about it in the last episode. And I think it's very helpful to think about this scene, this heroic scene in The Lord of the Rings, and also pair it with something like D-Day, which is kind of the same thing, really. I mean, one's fictional, one is not, but both are just these cases of an incredible amount of courage by many people in the face of death. And so number one is just that ability, that courage to accept your mortality, to accept that you're probably going to die. I mean, you're taking the very thing that you're afraid of and you're screaming it. You're owning it. And so number one, courage, which I spent most of the last episode discussing. But there's also like an act of defiance in there, right? Think about those young men at D-Day getting off the boat. There's almost like that act of defiance that Nazis, if you want to kill us, if you want to try and take over, well, you know what? We are going to defy you. We're not afraid. We're going to fight you. Churchill, when England, London was being just bombarded with bombs from France. Of course, it wasn't the French. It was Germany bombing them from the shores of France. But they would actually fire back. Even though a lot of the bombing happened at night, Churchill wanted them to fire back because they wanted them to know that we are fighting back, that we are defying you, that we do not stand for what you are standing for. We're not just going to lay over. There's resilience here. Even though the bombing was happening at night and the chances of them hitting something is pretty low because you can't see anything. It's pitch black out. There's just that element of defiance. I mean, you could imagine just the power of a series of planes going overhead, dropping bombs, and the citizens underneath that are probably going to die, at least a portion of them, just screaming back, death, death, death. Wow, just really, really intense. But I want to talk about this idea of death as something that might not be completely stoic, but in a sense it really is, because we use death, again, we use the meditation of death in Stoicism to really set perspective on our lives and to prioritize certain things. But in Tolkien's work, in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and of course he was incredibly influenced by Catholicism, we can really look at death as a gift. We tend to naturally look at death as a curse. We tend to look at death and think about our own death as, like, I'm not going to be here forever. What a curse. What a terrible thing. What a unjust thing. It's unfair. Life's unfair because it comes to an end. But we can also think of death as a gift. You know, I think the Greeks were some of the first people to get this right because the Greek gods were known to be envious of men because they would die someday. And so what happens if you were immortal? I mean, think about it. Sometimes I think about the idea of death and then I think about the idea of mortality, or rather immortality, living forever. And it's kind of strange that if I were to say to you, okay, are you afraid of death? Most people, if they're being honest with themselves, would say yes. And then if you say, are you afraid of living forever if you could never die? Now that also kind of scares you a little bit. Just this idea that you're never going to die, that you can't die. That's kind of crazy too, right? And so in some sense, this idea of death as being a gift, it's like, well, maybe immortality would be a curse. Let's get back to the Greek gods. They say, we are envious of mortal men because they will die. And so what happens when you know you will die? I mean, I know one thing. I know if I spend too many days being lazy, and then I remember that I'm not going to be here forever, what I do is I go to work. I try and do things for other people. I try to enjoy myself. I try to get out in nature. I try and spend time with family, with friends. If you have a family member that is dying right now, and if that doesn't slap you across the face and tell you to go spend some more time with them before they pass away, and you can see that as a gift. You can see, okay, it's kind of a curse in some sense because the person's passing away, but maybe you wouldn't even spend time with them if they weren't dying. Maybe we wouldn't care about each other at all. Maybe we wouldn't be compassionate, empathetic. Maybe none of that would exist without this idea of death. And so life becomes more beautiful because of death. Life becomes something that has opportunity for kindness, for compassion, for friendship, for togetherness. Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. And if we go to Tolkien's world, and I'm not going to dig too deep into the Silmarillion, which is the book that talks about kind of like the creation story of the Lord of the Rings. I'm just really revealing my nerdiness now. But they talk about in that how God in the Lord of the Rings universe, they talk about how they first had elves, which were kind of gods. They were immortal beings. They couldn't die. And elves were kind of, what would you say? Kind of like people that think they're better than everybody else. And they don't really care about anything. They kind of just go off in their own world, and they stay in their own little environment, and they are bound to live forever. And then they talk about the creation of men and how men were not cursed with the death that we all have to face. Men are actually gifted mortality. Mortality was seen as a gift. Mortality is the gift of the gods to men. And you could imagine, like, the world as we live in it right now. Now, we don't know if there's an afterlife. We really have no idea what happens after we die. But if you could imagine that you could not die, that you were incapable of death, but then there were some other beings on Earth that could die, you'd probably think, like, I wonder if there is something after this. I wonder if there is something better. Or maybe just not existing is better than existing. Like, you don't know. You really don't know what happens when you die. And so if you were a person that could not die, you would probably look at a person that could die and think, that's a gift in some sense. And then you look at them, how they're motivated, how they are joyful, how they are even sad. And you can look at that as a gift. That death was a gift because look at how happy they are compared to me. Death is a freedom. I mean, Epictetus talks about this, right? He talks about slavery, and he talks about how death is always an option. And so you talk about, oh, I don't have a choice. Well, death is a choice. You talk about situations in Nazi Germany where people were forced to do terrible things, quote, quote, forced. Epictetus would say, no, you weren't forced. You could have died. And so death is and can be considered a gift. Philosophically, very interesting. Men have the freedom to die. We don't always think about it like that. And what's even crazier about this is that not even the angels in the Lord of the Rings, right? You got Gandalf, you got these wizards. They didn't even know what happened to men after they died. And so death, whatever happens to us, is unknown to us. It was also unknown to them. It's still seen as a gift. Mortality drives virtue. It drives heroism. That scream of death, of defiance, of courage. It's an assertion of humanity. It's transcendence above the fear of death. It's the same as those young men at D-Day that said, my death can have a purpose because my death may stop this war, which may produce peace. My death can have a purpose because I am finite. It means I can sacrifice myself for the good of others. Man. Let's have a little look at the immortal perspective from the elves. Again, if we were to live forever, we have no fear. And if we have no fear, we have no courage. Because a bold act, a heroic act without any fear is not really an act. It's just, there's no courage in there. So it's kind of a strange thing when we think about this idea of death, because we love life and we want to live, and it's almost like we don't want to have to deal with the negative side of it, but it's like looking at a coin and you see the heads and then you turn it around and you see the tails. You're looking at life and you're looking at death, and you could say, well, I don't want to have the tail side of the coin. But without the tail side of a coin, there could be no head side of the coin. Without life, there can be no death. Without death, there can be no life. It's like they're two sides of the same coin. And no matter how thinly you slice a coin, there are always two sides. And so again, I would encourage you when we're talking about this idea of death, again, to be clear, the Stoics say it's an indifferent, it's neither good nor bad, because it's something that we cannot control. But then when we meditate on it, we are trying to see it as a gift. Because the whole meditating on death thing, like, why do we need to do that? It's because we are afraid of death and we push it off. We don't want to think about it. We want to think like we're going to live forever. But what does us thinking like we're going to live forever do? It allows us to deprioritize things. It allows us to not do things for other people, not be courageous. Whereas if we take the thought of our death and we bring it inside of us and we own it, we walk with it every day, live like you are dying, because guess what? You are dying. That is a gift. Carrying death with you wherever you go, that is a gift, because it allows you to live in such a way that is of virtue. Let's wrap this up with, again, going back to that speech, death, death, death. It's courage, it's strength. In some sense, you could say it's a cry of despair, but it's one of spiritual clarity. It's, I know what's right. I know what's good. I know the good. I've seen the good. I'm acting in the good. Courage is a way for us to, in a sense, be eternal. Like those young men at D-Day. It is kind of an immortality through legacy. Maybe consider death as not being something that is a punishment from the divine, but maybe see it as a gift. Maybe see it as something that can actually be used for good. And then own that, walk with it. And in doing so, accept that human beings, we have a unique role in the cosmos. And if we embrace it as the inevitability that it is, we can transcend it. And through that, we can have meaning and hope.